All right, welcome back to our conversation with Gill from MTR Corporation. It's been really, really interesting talking about all the various aspects of the way that you've organized and thought through and planned and strategized for ESG, but really in terms of tying into the purpose and strategy of MTR generally. It's not, in other words, ESG is not something that you've kind of thrown onto it. It's core to like your long-term strategy. I want to look into the future. Right, and as we talk about, especially around sustainability, but in all these aspects of ESG, there's a core question around innovation. Mm-hmm. And we've talked a lot about strategy, and innovation and strategy, I think, go together very well. But what role, from an MTR perspective, does innovation play in things like carbon neutrality or sustainability generally? And what are some steps that you all have taken in terms of like integrating this sense of innovation into what you all do?
Absolutely. So I think you're right. It's going to be a key part to us being able to achieve our carbon emission reduction goals. As we think as well about extending our railway network and building new lines, I think we were touching on just earlier in our conversation about the challenge of trying to decarbonise construction projects.
Yeah.
And a couple of projects, I think we talked about one in the UK and one here that had committed to be carbon neutral, but actually using green materials, more innovative materials, I think only saved about 15% of their emissions.
Yeah.
And so the rest have to be offset. And so we're always looking for kind of new innovative solutions, both for our new projects, but also for our existing railway. And when we look at our broader climate change strategy, that brings in the carbon emission reductions that we talked about earlier. We also obviously want to continue being a low carbon public transport operator for Hong Kong, because from a city perspective, that's the cars that we take off the street are a huge contribution towards Hong Kong reaching its targets. But then we absolutely have to look at adaptation and resilience. We are seeing more extreme weather events year in, year out. Here in Hong Kong, we had 2 typhoons, I think in November this year. We've seen black rain, and flooding coming into our network. So are there ways that we can use technology to help us better identify those events kind of before they happen, or certainly respond to them? So a couple of things we've been trialling recently. One relates to tree management and maintenance.
Okay.
So along some of the open aspects of our railway, we have an awful lot of trees,
Yeah.
not always owned or maintained by us.
Yeah.
But we've now set up a system whereby we can track almost every tree that's along the network. We know what type of trees they are, we know sort of how sturdy they are, and we know how resilient they are depending on which direction a storm is coming from. So as a typhoon is coming into Hong Kong, we can almost say, it's probably not quite this detailed yet, but those 5 trees are the ones that we really need to be keeping an eye on.
Wow.
And so we can sort of track them, we can see how they behave, and we know that that's likely to be the area that we have to clean up after a storm has happened.
Yeah, so for those, again, if you haven't lived or worked in Hong Kong, there's beautiful old banyan trees, for example.
Yes.
Hong Kong is a place where, especially in a lot of urban areas, the trees are a natural part of the topography. If you're walking down the street, it can be extremely vertical in terms of the buildings, but the trees are literally just growing out of the side of the road or in the sidewalk. And so you'll see a numbering system for trees all across Hong Kong. It's one of the things that people maybe don't even realize, but it's something that the government tracks very closely.
Yes.
Because it can be a hazard. We do have a lot of storms here, a lot of strong winds. And so they want to make sure that they're understanding, on the one hand, preservation of that biodiversity and the trees and the systems, and not removing them because they're, quite frankly, beautiful.
Yes.
But at the same time, they can be hazardous and they can
Yes.
get in the way, and they can be an issue, especially for a rail line if they fall in the way. So
Yes.
that's very interesting. I hadn't heard that before. That's super interesting. So getting back to this really quickly in terms of innovation and looking forward, what would be, from an MTR perspective or just from a Gill perspective, what would be the things that you would say that companies in a place like Hong Kong or going forward should be focusing on from an ESG perspective? And if you could give like your words of advice for an organization that's trying to implement these long-term strategies, what would be the things that you would encourage organizations to consider?
So 2 things, I think, maybe. And one is, we have to work together in this space. When you take something like extreme weather and the resilience of the city to extreme weather, we can protect our rail network as best we can. But if other facilities are not also protected, and this needs a role from government as well, then as a city, we're not going to be overall kind of resilient. And so I think it's a space, where we can work together, and generally people don't take sort of professional pride in their ESG achievements.
Yeah.
They are prepared to share them. And the second, I think, goes back to where we started, which is to really focus on the areas that are material to you as a business. So where can you have the biggest impact on society, on the environment? Focus on those areas. And between the different businesses, companies, organisations in Hong Kong, then we should try and make sure that we're sort of mutually exclusive but collectively exhaustive. You know, we've covered kind of all of the areas. But it's if you focus on what you can do well and where you can have the biggest impact, then I think overall as a city we'll be in a much better place.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to kind of end this conversation, because we started with the idea of shareholder capitalism, right? Milton Friedman, this professor, he kind of brought together this idea and really popularized this idea for the past 50 years, basically, where the core role of the company is to generate profit for shareholders. It's a very short-term kind of perspective, and a lot of success and wealth and has been driven off of that. But now we're entering this new era where we have to kind of consider, okay, what is the next step? And we've talked about stakeholder capitalism and what that relates to. And so the professor that kind of popularized that is a guy named Professor Friedman. Very similar, Freeman, very hard to say. Yeah. But he said that the goal of a company is effectively to create a customer and to create products and services that people actually need, right? And although a subtle difference, and it may be for a lot of people, maybe well, duh, but the reality is those are two fundamentally different concepts, where it's like, is the goal to generate profit for shareholders, or is the goal to create products and services that people actually need and want? And I think to the extent that a company can point to that sense of purpose and why that they are deserving of that incorporation that we give them as society and as from our government perspective, I think that really relates to early stage entrepreneurs. It relates to privately held large companies. It relates to publicly held companies, and so I think that's hopefully the perspective that a lot of people are going to be taking going forward as we teach these things in business schools going forward, because it is a cooperative thing. What I typically say to my students is we're kind of beyond the point in developed economies like Hong Kong where we can solve all of our problems individually, whether that means from an organizational perspective or whether it means from a societal perspective. The reality is our supply chains are global. The reality is that the climate change is global. The many different issues that we might have are at a macro scale, and we can't just solve them individually anymore. And so I think, hopefully, this next version of capitalism, whatever we call it and whatever it looks like, takes a bit of the playbook of MTR, and it's more of a collaborative, stakeholder-based process. We're willing to deal with the griminess and friction that comes from a diverse and broad board, and to get to the point where we're creating products and services, and in your case, transportation, that really serves a core purpose. And then we have that perspective and vision of what that purpose is, and we're continually kind of working towards that.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with us today. Really appreciate it. I know our learners have surely gained a lot, and I think most importantly, I'm excited to continue riding on MTR for many, many years into the future. Yeah.
I hope you do. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.